Welcome to your first time logging into Constellation HR. We just want to take a minute here and talk about some more of the soft skills that are needed to go ahead and actually administer that performance management discussion. So the user guides that have been distributed are focusing solely on how to use the system and utilize the functionality of the system. But here in this space, we're going to take a few minutes to go ahead and kind of just go over some reminders about how to have that discussion in terms of performance management. So when we talk about performance management, there is some interpersonal skills that are needed to be a successful supervisor or manager. So if you look at the three basic skills that all supervisory positions need to hold, the first is a technical knowledge. So that's how to do the function of the job. There's the administrative, which is in addition to the supervisory responsibility. And then there's the interpersonal. So interpersonal skills are needed at all positions within an organization, from supervisory, management, executive, and just at an employee level. But it's crucial at a management level to be able to have effective conversations with employees regarding all aspects of the job, especially performance. So there's quite a few factors that influence employees' performance. The job contact, fellow workers, the interpersonal skills amongst the department is crucial. If there's opportunities for advancement, people are motivated to go ahead and grow their careers and succession planning. Pay is usually the number one motivator for employment. However, it's not necessarily the number one motivator, or I would say dissatisfier, amongst employees in typical surveys. One of the big ones is the supervisory practices. So it's crucial. There's lots of aspects of being a supervisor, but a crucial one is to go ahead and give feedback that is objective and consistent on performance, as well as timely and repeated. So we're trying to break the norm of having a year-end performance review, and it should be more of a fluid conversation over the course of the year. So of all of these factors, supervisors have the most control over the supervisory practices. So in definition per se, that's the way in which you communicate with your employees in guiding and influencing their performance. So there's three major principles that supervisors need to be aware of when conducting the performance appraisal. So the first one is the employee's self-concept and self-esteem. The second one is perception. And the third is feedback. So now we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about each of those principles. So when we look at self-concept and self-esteem, we all have, whether it's defined or not in a way that you think about it, a strong self-concept and self-esteem. And so we, by human nature, tend to act defensively whenever our concept of ourselves is criticized or attacked. So managers need to take that into consideration, and instead of putting employees in the situation, intentionally or unintentionally, where they feel that they need to just have a defensive attitude or defensive mindset, that managers need to consider ways of protecting the employee's self-esteem when providing feedback. So there's a few ways to accomplish it. The first one is protecting, so not attacking the employee's self-esteem. We need to keep the discussion off a personal level, and then gain the employee's support and cooperation in accomplishing what needs to be done. So when we talk about this, it's crucial, the bullet point number 2, to keep the discussion off a personal level. When you use words like you or attacking a person directly, it's just human nature. It's that fight or flight instinct to go ahead and act defensively. So we'll go into some examples of the whole concept in a minute here, but it's just something that it seems like common sense, but maybe it's not something we think about all the time. So that's why I like to just pinpoint it out that your ultimate job as the manager when providing performance feedback is to go ahead and do your best to help protect that employee's self-esteem, because as soon as the conversation becomes on the defensive, employees are going to shut down, they're going to build a wall, and you're not going to be able to gain their support and cooperation to accomplish what needs to get accomplished. So now let's talk about perception. So perception is how the employee views the situation that you're discussing. And the outcome of the discussion is all going to depend on how that situation is perceived. So like I was just saying, when employees start to become defensive and the whole conversation, regardless of the tone or the context, is just going to become negative, and employees are going to feel like they're going to need to defend themselves, and they're going to become almost on the attack. Again, it's human nature, and so that's why being in the management position, to just keep aware of the employee's perception and their self-esteem will help to produce better conversations, in turn then better results. So if the situation's not perceived the same by the employee and the supervisor, it's likely that there's not going to be any positive change in the work situation. So depending on how the discussion is handled, employees' responses could be positive or negative. And that negative is that feeling on the attack and putting up walls and just having the whole tone of the conversation turn. So if the discussion is going to be viewed or perceived and handled in a way to gain the employee's support and commitment, a positive response is more likely to occur. However, if the discussion is perceived and handled in another way, a negative response is likely to occur. So there's been numerous studies, and overall, that the majority of employees, if we're going to rate their performance just as a whole, are rating their performance at about an 85%. So out of 100, 85%. So simple little chart, they come in pretty high overall. So now when we ask managers, just in a whole, to go ahead and rate their employees, they're coming in at about 65% on average. So if we take a look here, that is a 20% gap in perception. And so we want to make sure that we're handling conversations effectively, but also we are not making employees feel like they're on the attack. So how much of a chance in a 20% disagreement is there going to be between managers and employees when you're discussing their performance? And is there a chance that the employee is going to start to feel threatened with their self-esteem? And so both of those are valid concerns. So now we're going to talk about feedback. So feedback is the practice of getting back to employees regarding their work performance. It's important to realize how to effectively provide feedback so that employee performance improves. So there's two types of feedback, positive or negative. And with positive feedback is where the employee views the situation as positive and the likelihood the performance will continue in that manner. For example, being complimented for meeting production standards. And this is is specific to a type of feedback, but we have found over and over in employee surveys, studies that have come out, that positive feedback is what's going to dictate change. So employees feel one of their largest complaints is their manager doesn't notice when they're doing things well or when things are going good. They don't hear any being complimented or positive feedback, reinforcement. However, as soon as the situation becomes negative, then they hear from their manager. So just to keep in mind going forward, when you get into the system, we're going to talk about informal reviews and what those are. And positive feedback is such a great thing to just go ahead and document in an informal review because it does go a lot further than you may initially think. So if we look at the other hand of positive feedback would be negative or non-rewarding feedback. And these just tend to decrease the likelihood of that performance happening again. So if you're having a discussion with an employee after immediately arriving late to work. So let's take a look here at both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement or criticism that can be used to influence performance. And this couple lines here is crucial. Criticism or negative reinforcement will only stop undesirable performance temporarily. It's not going to motivate a person to excel. 90% of personalities and people are wired to go ahead, and the negative or criticism isn't going to change behaviors permanently. It's a temporary fix. So when we're giving feedback in personal terms and non-specific, so you need to go ahead and take them out of the situation, and we don't want vague feedback. Being as specific as possible, it gives you as a manager confidence that what you're saying, you have specific examples in case the situation or the conversation tends to escalate, as well as keeping the personal terms out of the conversation, like you, and threatening, that is perceived as threatening their self-esteem. So for example, you're always late. That is just a statement that's going to be unintentionally met with hostility. So verse, if you say, you were late twice this week and I'd like to talk to you about it, and maybe come off in terms of, I just want to make sure that there may not be something going on that I may not be aware of, and this is unlike you, and I just want to address it before it gets out of control. Is there anything I can do to help you? To just make the conversation non-threatening. It also helps for employees to feel comfortable in order to open up in case it may be a larger issue. So let's talk about, you don't care about your job. That is completely unspecific. We have no idea what you're talking about in general, as well as, again, it's going to elicit the employee to become defensive. Verse, if you say something along the lines as, I noticed that your scrap or your performance or your metrics, whatever it may be, was above the limit or was lower than expectation, and I just want to talk about it. I want to know, is there something going on? Is there something I can do to help you? Is this maybe just an off week and we'll get back on track? But it's opening up the discussion and saying that I'm here to assist you because I'm your manager and that's my job, and I want you to feel comfortable having that conversation. So when you use those you words and your, it just, people feel like they're being attacked, their self-esteem, and it's something that you don't necessarily know what their perception is until you ask them. So you want to make sure that you have the information and that they feel comfortable to open up in order to go ahead and have good conversations. And then in terms, leave that conversation on a positive note and go ahead and then see the change in the future. So just a little summary here. Feedback obviously can influence employee performance, and so negative reinforcement or feedback is only going to stop the undesirable performance temporarily. And permanent changes in performance are produced by positive feedback. So employees just want to know that their actions are being recognized, and so it's crucial to provide that positive feedback along the way to go ahead and maintain performance and improve performance. So feedback must be specific in order to be effective. So whether that's positive or negative, but even in a positive format where you address a situation with an employee that says, I noticed that you did a great job on project X, Y, and Z. You really went above and beyond. Here's why. It's bringing it home as opposed to, I see you did great on that project, thanks. Where it's just not specific enough. And employees want to know that you're aware of the little things that they do on a regular basis and they just don't go unnoticed. And we never want to personalize the feedback. We want to put it in performance terms. So being objective, using examples is a way to go ahead and help maintain your employee self-esteem and not put them on the defense. So, and then the overall, when giving feedback, you want to protect the employee self-esteem. So if they have to say something that's going to be undesirable, and that's unfortunately part of the job of being a manager, take a couple of minutes before delivering that conversation and just think about, if roles were reversed, how you would interpret that and how you would it would affect your self-esteem, and then just try and come at it as diplomatic as possible so that we don't get into a situation where employees feel defensive and then the conversation takes a different turn. So we've talked about how to deliver feedback. Now let's take a second here to talk about why performance appraisals. And establishing an effective procedure to provide periodic feedback concerning an employee's performance. It develops a clear perspective of the employee's view of the job, accomplishments, disappointments, problems, ideas, suggestions. And it provides the employee with an accurate description of the supervisor's overall view of his or her performance. It recognizes and reinforces the desirable employee behaviors. It identifies and plans corrective actions where change in behavior is required or desired. And it establishes the expectation of employee success. It advances the perception of the supervisor as a resource to the employee to successfully perform that job. And so what we're trying to do here is to go ahead and get off of a once a year conversation about performance. We are going to summarize it once a year in a formal manner, and that has benefits for HR, merit, things like that, it's crucial to summarize. However, to go ahead and have one-on-one conversations about performance throughout the year is crucial to knowing, for that employee to know where they stand at all times. Part of the reason that a formal year-end, once-a-year discussion on performance is not effective is because employees go into that conversation often not knowing where they're going to stand and what's going to be said. So before even walking in that door, there's anxiety. They're already feeling like their self esteem may be and self concept may be threatened. And they're going to go in on the defense to begin with. So everything that's said and had during that once a year conversation really loses so much effectiveness of that conversation because of all the stigma that is built around a formal once a year conversation on performance. So effective performance reviews are designed to improve performance, reinforce strengths, provide feedback, and then strengthen your role, your supervisory role as their manager. You want to work towards gradual improvements in performance. Rarely is performance going to go from an unacceptable level to an exceeding level overnight. And so you want to make sure that you're communicating your views of the job that's being done, rather assume or understand or ignore it. And so if part of the feedback is that, timely feedback on a situation means that it's not something that is going unheard because you're just assuming that the employee is on the same page. So to talk about performance on a regular basis, make sure that everyone's on the same page, and then so that employee knows exactly what your expectations are for the job, instead of just assuming that, oh, well, they must know that they're not doing an acceptable job, or they must know. We don't want to assume. It's easy enough to have a quick conversation. Nothing has to be formal as you go along. So to just have a conversation about performance, reinforce expectations throughout the year is crucial. They're also used to identify and plan corrective actions where help may be needed. So things usually don't change overnight, and sometimes it may be because employees don't know what to do in order to get back on track or to make those changes. So your job as a manager is to help and lay out an action plan within the informal review system. In the program, there is a category for corrective action planning. So that's something that should be, a plan should be in place, and then it should be tracked and monitored on a regular basis. And then to provide personal and meaningful communications directly between a manager and an employee. And so oftentimes it's easy to get overwhelmed with daily activities and not go ahead and carve out that time for one-on-one conversations. So we always try and recommend, if at all possible, that conversations on performance, whether it's the performance appraisal once a year or it's these informal reviews that you're having, are done on a face-to-face basis, or at least over the phone if it's not possible. We've been asked to go ahead and have lots of back and forth within the system, which we do, but I like to limit it on certain situations because I think it's so crucial that a face-to-face conversation or calling up the phone to talk about performance for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, especially if you're giving positive feedback, goes so much further than leaving a comment within a system or sending an email. So I really want to encourage and change the mindset that as much one-on-one and personal communication is key. So performance reviews are not intended to be negative. So there should be one or two areas of improvement that can be dealt with as an improvement area. It's not a failure. And if you go into a performance appraisal and have a laundry list of things and the employee is not doing up to your standards, that's going to create resentment. So, and if most of the areas of performance are negative over the long term, that goes back to saying that the appropriate corrective actions hadn't been taken on a timely basis. So that goes almost back to you can't hold an employee accountable for things that they didn't know, and we don't want to assume what they knew. And the more timely the feedback is, the more effective it is. So letting an employee get away with coming into work late for 2 or 3 weeks before saying anything, that employee is assuming that, well, attendance and tardiness isn't a crucial issue. Where even though it is, addressing it on day 2 or 3 would have probably solved that situation before it got bigger. So performance reviews should not be used as a disciplinary club for failure to meet expectations, standards. Rather, they should be used to provide recognition for areas of good performance, provide recognition for areas that are improving. The positive feedback is what's going to elicit change. So letting an employee know that you see that they're working hard to improve areas that they may have struggled with is crucial. And then you want to set set plans for mutually working on potential areas of improvement. So even if you have a star employee, there's probably going to be an area or two where they have some room for improvement. And there's you want to work with the employee to set those areas and those improvements so that they feel like they have a say in the process. And the more that they feel they have a buy-in, the more likely that change is going to happen. So this focus is working towards positive action and improvement, and the focus is not on punishment or failure to set goals and things like that. So performance reviews should be limited to the review of performance, and then other time should be set aside to discuss raises or merit and discussion of career planning. I know that it gets hard to kind of schedule time, especially if you have multiple employees, to sit down and have separate discussions, but it's crucial in terms of performance to make sure that the overall takeaway of that discussion is based on performance. So if you start talking about merit or raises, increases, career planning and goals and what type of training they may need, that waters down the overall takeaway of performance. So, and especially because you've set aside a usually a set amount of time, and you want to make sure that you're fully using that time to discuss performance, because talking about other areas can definitely go ahead and engulf that time that you've had. So you want to make sure that you schedule additional meetings. I know that sometimes it's much easier said than done, but it's crucial to make sure that that performance discussion takeaway is just performance. Another thing before you go ahead and have that conversation is to do your homework. So refer back to the notes that you've put within the informal review, how you've put notes within all of the performance factors that you've chosen, and feel free to make additional notes and bring additional documentation to the meeting, because you don't want to go ahead and get in a situation where the employee is questioning things and you don't have the answers, and employees will pick up on that, and it will just change the overall tone of that conversation. And like we touched at before, it's important to think of how the discussion will be handled in terms of the viewpoint from the employee. And that just goes back to their perception, their self-esteem, and the type of feedback that they're going to be receiving. So when you're scheduling the performance appraisal review, give the employee advance notice of the upcoming meeting so they have time to go ahead and organize their own thoughts. Don't worry about this as coming up with excuses. The subject's performance, you can't argue with the facts and trends, but it should be something that the employee feels like they've had time to review and maybe make their own notes as opposed to something that's been sprung on them. And they want time and they need time to honestly consider their own performance and identify areas that may be their own improvement areas. And so they may even have legitimate obstacles with completing their job that you might be able to help. And so giving them the time to adequately prepare for the meeting will go ahead and make sure it's more effective on both sides. And when you're giving advance notice, it's easy to go ahead and say, oh, your performance appraisal is coming up. Let's go ahead and put that on the calendar. It elicits that fear of being evaluated. It increases people's self-awareness, puts them on the defense. So it's easier to just say, hey, let's set up a meeting and talk about how things have been going since last year. And especially if you're utilizing the informal review, talking about performance is going to start to become second nature to both you and employees. So it's not going to be all of this lead up to this one formal conversation. And a lot of times too, I suggest to ask them to think about areas of performance that they may see that they need an improvement, because it's interesting to go ahead and learn what their perception is. We try and get as much information as possible within the employee input forms that employees will fill out. All of the managers are going to fill one out because they're still an employee to their manager, but we like to ask open-ended questions, so if there is some sort of an issue, we hope that it's brought up ahead of time, because we don't want the conversation to go unscripted for both the management or the employee side. And then during that discussion, stick to your discussion points. There's no issue in having notes and having things that you want to talk about and specific examples. It shows the employee that you've spent the time to go ahead and think about performance review and that you're recognizing the things that they're doing. So the last point that I want to just go over are kind of 8 steps to think about when you're going to have this discussion about performance. So the first one is state the purpose of the session is to review how things are going on the job. We don't need to use ominous terms like it's your year-end review or it's your performance appraisal. We just want to review how things are going. Start off by asking the employee's view of how things are going, and then listen openly, and you don't need to go ahead and combat everything that they say right off the bat. Let them speak, let them go ahead and get things off of their mind, and then make sure that we don't react defensively. And then provide an initial statement of your evaluation of the employee's overall performance. And then 4 would be to recognize the desirable behaviors, especially those improvements since the last review. So go ahead and start off on a positive note. And so if there's going to be some areas of improvement, outline 1 or 2. And that's really all there should be by the time we get to this formal area. Again, as we had mentioned before, if there's a whole laundry list, then we have other issues about not addressing things on time. And when you're talking about these areas of improvement, start by asking for the employee suggestion for solutions to the problem, because ultimately it's going to be up to the employee to make the changes and hold themselves accountable. So open it up to them and ask what they feel like would be the answer to the problems. And if you need to go ahead and put together a formalized corrective action plan, make sure that it's something that's developed together and agreed upon, and that you set follow-up. So the next time that you review issues should not be next year. It should be 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, and on a continual basis. And as in when performance starts to improve, then you can go ahead and not necessarily meet as often. But in the beginning, it's crucial to go ahead and meet on a regular basis. And corrective action plans can be entered into the informal review section of the system so that it's documented. You have all your notes in one place. And then when you go to fill out your next formal appraisal, you'll be able to see, and so you can recognize all the improvements that have been made. And then the last one, end on an encouraging note. If appropriate, express your personal satisfaction and appreciation for the employee's performance. Letting them know that you believe in them, you appreciate it, you see the hard work that they're doing goes a long way. And that's the overall takeaway, is how you end the discussion from the employee. So again, we want to keep in the back of our mind, what's that employee's perception going to be of this conversation? So that goes ahead and wraps up kind of some important things to think about and keep in the back of your mind when you're having these discussions about performance. This video will be available for you to reference if you need it. The user guides are available to use the system. And if you do have additional questions, feel free to go to HR and have a discussion with HR, ask questions. Us here at Constellation are always available to get into discussions and answer questions. And so we just want to, it's not necessarily just a system to get you from A to B. It's a philosophy and a mindset to go ahead and improve performance overall. So that's what we're here for. So please feel free to utilize us. If you do want to reach out to us directly for technical or more training, things like that, we do have a email address, which is support@constellationhr.com. Feel free to email us there, and someone from our team will address anything else. Thank you so much, and have a great day.